Hello, I hope you're having a wonderful day. My name is Sarah. I am a BCBA, and today we are back with podcast number 9. This is your channel, yourABAhelp, and I am here to help solve all of your ABA problems. And right now, that's the task list. And it's the final parts of task list B that we're tackling today, guys. We're just going to wrap up a few terms. I'm not going to do verbal behavior. And I'm not going to do derived stimulus relations until later. I really need the time to put those together and create high quality information because those two topics are beasts in themselves, especially verbal behavior. I love how in the task list it's just a casual number, a casual task list item, but in reality is huge. Skinner wrote an entire book on it. It's so complicated. So my plan is to work on that and really get some high quality content in there, and it should be out in the next few podcasts. It's coming. I just need a little bit more time. In the meantime, though, I am working on our Task List C podcast and getting that all ready, and that will be uploaded next. We'll be talking about measurements, how to measure things, what to measure, what do you do with measurement, we know we need data, but how do you do that? How do you pick? What's the right one? All that complicated stuff we are going to get into, and we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about all the terms, all the fun stuff. Today, we're going to do a quick little podcast, and we're just going to wrap everything up. Put a nice little bow on Task List B for now. We'll come back to it later, and we're going to go much more in depth with all these concepts when we get to section 2 of the task list, applications. And at the end, I'm going to talk a lot more about my plan moving forward and how I'm going to tie applications into a podcast. And I'm very excited about it. It's something I'm very passionate about, so I'm going to talk about that at the end. In the meantime, we're going to get right into talking about the rest of those little terms that are sprinkled throughout task list B that I didn't hit on. And this is just going to be putting our bow on it. It's going to be a good time. First up, we've got discriminative stimulus. That's an SD. I'm going to give you the Cooper definition. A stimulus in the presence of which a given behavior has been reinforced, and in the absence of which that behavior has not been reinforced. As a result of this history, an SD evokes operant behavior because its presence signals the availability of reinforcement. Cool. So let's talk about that definition a little bit, and then we're going to talk about SD, some examples. We are going to compare and contrast SD and MO, and kind of how you pick them out, the basics on that. Like I've said a million times, we'll get to it way more later, but what's the basics you need to know here? One of the key components to know about SD is it has to signal reinforcement. So reinforcement has to follow the SD in order for it to be an SD, a discriminative stimulus. This stimulus, this thing is discriminative. You can discriminate it from the other things in the environment, and it signals reinforcement. The signaling and reinforcement could literally be anything, guys. It could be seeing your coffee maker and you're wanting coffee and it's signaling that this is your SD. Grabbing a pod, putting it in is going to give you your reinforcement of coffee. It could be your little app on your phone to clock into work on time. There's a ton of examples of what SDs are, and SDs are all dependent on the situation. They're all dependent on the person's motivation and the prompts. All the things in the environment, you have to really be able to pick out SDs. SDs aren't something that are predetermined. It's all based on that history of reinforcement, like we know. Lots of examples of SD. It could be, you seeing your coffee maker and you're wanting coffee, and I put the pod in and I make my coffee. That's only an SD for me for my coffee making behavior if I'm motivated for coffee and I like coffee. If you're making a cup of coffee and you don't like coffee, that's not going to be an SD for you. It's not signaling reinforcement. If you're wanting a soda instead, you're not a coffee drinker, right? In the presence of SD, you're always going to have an S delta. So the thing that is signaling that reinforcement is not available. So if I'm wanting a cup of coffee and I see a pop, I'm not going to grab that pop because that's not going to give me reinforcement of what I'm wanting. That's not going to reinforce my behavior. My MO doesn't match drinking that pop. I want coffee. Same thing for a non-coffee drinker. And millions of examples. If you guys work in this field, you know SDs, you know S deltas. The biggest thing is picking them out in story problems and not getting confused with MO and all the complex things of MO. And I'm going to put a little graphic on the screen here of how MO, SD, and the 3-term contingency all work together in harmony and help us understand behavior First, we've got MO. So you've got to have motivation established. You have to know what you want, even if you don't know in your head. There has to be a motivation there, and then there's got to be an SD signaling reinforcement for that behavior of what you're wanting or what you're not wanting to do, what you're wanting to escape, things like that. We've got our MO, our SD, and then we have our 3-term contingency that will follow. If we have our motivation, we have our SD, we can have our antecedent to our behavior that we engage in to reinforce or punish those MO and SD contingencies. And then after all of that, we got our consequence. So understanding when you are looking at those problems and trying to understand what the heck is going in this problem, when you're out in the field and you're trying to understand what the heck is going on in the situation, visually think about the MO, SD, 3-term contingency. Where do those things fall? And you can start to try to break it down and be like, okay, I understand the motivation here. I don't know what's signaling them to do this. I know the antecedent. Behavior, yeah, you should know. Consequence, maybe. You can fill it out in your head kind of thing. And there's definitely instances where SD and antecedent can overlap. It really depends on if that SD directly triggers behavior or if there are things that occur in between. It just depends on the situation. So obviously, every SD is not going to get reinforced in the contingencies that we are seeking every single time. Like every time we crave chocolate and reach for the chocolate, that doesn't mean the chocolate bag is going to have chocolate in it, right? It could be empty, not reinforcing our behavior. It all depends. All right, up next, we got MO, motivating operations. MO, I think, is arguably just about the most important thing in ABA as far as behavior change goes and what we do for children with autism. If they don't have motivation, if we don't have motivation to do something, we are not going to do it. Somebody can tell us what to do and try to make us do it, depending on the contingencies in the situation, or MO to avoid those repercussions, things like that. We might do it, but we have MO. We always have motivation. There's always a reason that we do things. An important thing to understand about MO and SD and how they get confusing is that an important function for MO is it alters the value of the reinforcer or punisher. SD signals that there's reinforcement available, but MO alters the value. How bad do you want it, or how much do you not want it, to how much do you want to avoid it, all that. MO. And that's where terms like deprivation and satiation come in, and you have our vocative and we have our bative. All of those we're going to talk about. That is going to describe to us where our MO is at. Being careful and conscious of when you're applying different interventions or trying out different strategies of that MO and how satiation and deprivation can play into your intervention strategies is important. For example, I'm not going to try out a really difficult, complicated new intervention strategy or learning technique. I'm going to teach this kid this complicated puzzle at 4:25 right before pickup at the end of the day in the clinic, right? If a kid's hungry, I'm probably going to want to teach them demanding for food, using that MO, I am hungry, I want to eat my chips, teaching them how to ask for their chips so they can follow that natural 3-term contingency with that MO and SD in there. They can ask for those chips, get those chips, reinforce that behavior because they were motivated. If they don't want chips, they're not going to demand for chips. And it seems so simple, but I see a lot of BCBAs miss this one, or they'll try to force kids to ask for things that they don't want in the name of practicing or in the name of a target in a program. They don't want it, and they're not going to do it. And some examples of MO is hungry, bored, tired, those non-ABA words. And it could also be ABA things like escape, attention, the big and it could be situational. It could be to pet that puppy, to, scream really loud because it feels good in your throat. You just need an itch in your throat to get out. It could be a headache. It could be so many things. Why is the behavior happening in this moment? That's going to be your MO. What is that person wanting to engage in? MO. SD is going to be the signaling of how to get that to happen. How to get your MO, your needs met, how to avoid things. SD. So let's do some examples here. A good clinic example is, let's say you are doing hand-over-hand prompting and you're teaching a kid to clap their hands, or just doing a couple of trials back to back, and they have an itch on their hand, like in between their fingers a little sweaty and they want to itch it, but you are holding their hands and you're prompting them and you're trying to teach them how to clap. Their motivation in that moment is to get your hands off so they can itch that itch. The signaling and reinforcement here would be to remove your hands, so that way they can reinforce that behavior of itching. MO, they got an itch. SD, your hands need to move. Antecedent, maybe they look down at your hands and they're trying to pull them, that's not working. The behavior that they do, they bite you, because they're like, I need to itch my hands. Consequence, they itch their hand. So that chain there has been reinforced. Next time their hands itch really bad and you're not moving your hands, they're probably going to bite you because they know it worked, it got reinforced. And when that MO is really high, so really, when you got an itch, you can't itch. Like if you ever think about your nose and it starts to get itchy and you can't itch it, that's going to be the itchiest thing you've ever had in your entire life. So when that gets reinforced, a solution to that high motivation problem, it's going to be strong. So that's where we get a lot of problem behaviors. Is the solution to what they're needing is quicker, it's faster, it's more effective than the alternative behaviors to try to give them. An example I'm talking about here is if a kid's in class and they scream out, "Hey teacher," the teacher's more likely to look right away and give them attention, be like, "Sit down," or "Quiet." Versus if they nicely raise their hand, they're going to have to sit there and wait. Doing the right thing, but they're not getting reinforced in the same way that they would for the other behavior of yelling out. So keeping those things in mind when you're starting to put these interventions in and understanding why things aren't working, MOSD is a great place to start looking. Another invisible way, like an outlier way to understand how the three-term contingency, SD, and MO kind of interact with each other in ways that we might not understand, is understanding rule-governed behavior versus contingency behavior. Rule-governed behavior, I'm going to give you the definition. Rule-governed behavior is behavior controlled by a rule, a verbal statement, or antecedent behavior consequence contingency. It's like a first-then statement. Enables human behavior to come under the indirect control of temporary, remote, or improbable but potentially significant consequences, often used in contrast to contingency-shaped behavior, a term used to indicate behavior selected and maintained by controlled, temporary, close consequences. Let's understand those. Rule-shaped behavior is going to be me telling somebody that if you do or don't do this thing, this crazy, difficult, or very dramatic consequence will happen. This can be those more serious contingencies to that person, so it could be dependent on each person. Like when it's rule-governed behavior, it doesn't mean it's like set rules that everybody's going to abide by, obviously, because like in society we have people who break rules. For them, those consequences weren't great enough to listen to that rule. So they had to come in contact with the consequences in order to change their behavior, hopefully. Rule-governed behavior, some examples, is buckling your seatbelt so if you get into a wreck, you don't die, hopefully. Or if you touch the hot stove, you will burn your hand and it will hurt really bad. We use rule-governed behavior strategies for little kids a lot. Like parents will tell their kids, like, if you don't stop, I'm going to put you in timeout for 10 minutes. They might try really absurd consequences in order to get their kid to listen. And there's a lot of rule-governed behaviors in society, so you don't need to get hit by a car in order to learn to look both ways on the crosswalk. You understand that if you got hit by a car, that would be a really terrible consequence, and you don't want to come in contact with that, so you listen to that rule. So like same thing in school, if you go to the bathroom without asking the teacher, they will send you to the principal's office, and for you, that's very scary, and you don't want that. For other kids, that might not be scary, so that's where those contingencies, those rules are person dependent. Contingency-shaped behavior is the contrast, the opposite there. Contingency-shaped behavior are those situations where it's less dramatic and less serious, and you come in contact with those consequences. It's where you learn that if you do touch the stove, it does burn you. You've come in contact with that contingency. So when a parent told you that rule governed behavior, it didn't work. So for that kid, they had to touch it in order to learn. They've learned that behavior is a contingency shaped behavior. That's how you can tell the difference is, did they come in contact with a consequence, yes or no? That's going to be your answer. There's a few more little scragglers on that task list I'm going to talk about. There's a couple terms here. So we've got generalized, conditioned reinforcers, generalized, conditioned punishers, generalized punishers, generalized reinforcers. We've got maintenance, maintaining a skill, generalization in general. What do all of these different terms mean and how they interact with each other? We're going to talk about. Generalization definition in Cooper is a generic term that describes the behavior processes and behavior change outcomes. We know generalization as far as like treatment planning and ABA, applying it in the field, a little bit more as a child or a person being able to do a skill in different settings with different materials, different people, locations, environments, all of that you're going to consider for generalization. What you're going to know about generalization, I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar with this one, is that you need to program for generalization and you need to make sure that somebody can do it in different environments. So a really easy classic example is picture icon exchange, or PECs, where you can teach it in the clinic, you can teach it, in that child's classroom all you want, but if they can't do it in the kitchen, they can't ask for their food in there, or they can't take it home and ask for, their favorite TV show or ask for a midnight snack or whatever using their icons, they haven't generalized that skill to different settings, different people, different situations, environments, different SDs, different MOs, all that has to apply in order for them to truly master that skill. So if they can man with icons in their room and ask for the same 5 toys, great, but you need to generalize that skill. And we have maintenance that ties in there, where maintenance is all right, this kid has mastered this skill, they can do it, now let's make sure they maintain it. A hill that I will die on is a program that gets taught in a lot of BCBAs at work is personal information questions. Teaching a child to answer from an adult, what's your name, how old are you, what school do you go to, who are your parents, what's your phone number, things like that. So if they were to get lost or, they engage in social conversation, they can do that with the proper answers. However, what I find a lot of times is some BCBAs will forget to maintain that skill. If you don't ask a kid how old they are for 2 months, they're probably going to forget. Or what if they get older and they need to now say 5 rather than 4? You have to maintain that skill. Maintenance is something that you can check for on a regular schedule. You can just keep an eye on. It's something that you should slowly fade back. So in order to check maintenance, you should be checking it every week after they've mastered the skill and generalized it. Okay, in a week, are they still maintaining it? Some kids might need you to check it every day, and then every other day, and then every 3 days. It could be a very slow process to back ourselves out, make sure they can maintain the skill. And that's why teaching skills that contact the natural reinforcement contingencies in their environment is so important, so that skill maintains. Let me make that make sense. If a kid is being asked every day, what is your name, when they walk into the school, because that's just part of their attendance policy, they're going to maintain that skill naturally. Whereas if nobody ever asks them their name in their environment, and it would only be under that one emergency situation they got lost in, a store clerk asked their name, it's going to be very hard to maintain that skill, and you're going to have to be very specific about it. Whereas if you teach a skill that a kid is going to come in contact with every day and they're going to get reinforcement for that skill, it should maintain naturally. Like dressing, brushing their teeth, and their mom gives them the tablet every time after. Or, eating food. Or manning for food and it gets reinforced every single time. Things like that. So we got generalization and maintenance, we get those, and it could be the same thing for, behavior interventions, making sure that they can generalize that, manning for a break rather than screaming in different environments with different people, different therapists, they can do it at home, and making sure they can maintain it. So once we pull out our intervention, our prompts, our assistance, our visuals, can they still do it? Can they do it in school when they transition out? And then we've got generalized conditioned reinforcers and conditioned reinforcers, generalized conditioned punishers, and conditioned punisher. So we're going to start with just conditioned reinforcement and punishment. From our previous podcast, we learned that conditioned reinforcers is that pairing process that is occurring. So we've got our neutral stimulus and our conditioned stimulus, and they're being paired together, and we get our conditioned reinforcer. We know what those are. So now what is a generalized conditioned reinforcer / punisher? Think about it. We know what generalization is, so being able to do it with different settings, situations, materials, and people. So it's the same thing as a generalized conditioned reinforcer. So it's that stimuli getting generalized across multiple situations based on the reinforcement schedules. So money, tokens, arcade tickets, when you go to Dave & Buster's and you get those tokens, swiping the card in order to get your tokens, you see them on the screen. Those are all generalized conditioned reinforcers. So money inherently is not reinforcing. I give you $1. If you give a baby $1, they're not going to be stoked. It doesn't mean anything to them. It's not any different than a piece of paper, right? You've been conditioned and reinforced over time, and you've paired that with, getting reinforcement or getting food, being able to pay your bills, or, buying your first toy, things like that. You've paired with money. You've had that learning history. Now you're going to generalize it. You realize that, these paper tickets work the exact same way. I earned them by, winning the jackpot on the game, cash them in, or, my 5 pieces of candy at the arcade, generalized. Same thing for like classroom bucks. Your kid is in kindergarten and they have like a behavior management strategy of kindergarten bucks. They're going to generalize that conditioned reinforcer. And same thing for praise. So like somebody doesn't need to say great job every single time. You can generalize that to a high five, fist bump, elbow bump, a hug, a way to go buddy, things like that. Generalizing that conditioned reinforcer, whatever that conditioned reinforcer is, you're generalizing it. You guys got this, you know it, don't overthink it. A classic example of a conditioned punisher is getting reprimanded. You generalize that to the things that are getting paired with that punisher. Arms crossed, finger pointed, angry face. Maybe, you live in a home that's struggling and they throw things. Those are going to be all things that you generalize. So when those things come up in different situations, you're going to have similar responses that you had when that behavior happened the first time because it was reinforced. That might be where anxiety and things come in, or maybe you escape that situation, you leave, you put headphones in. All those different things are how you're going to deal with that generalized condition punisher. Teaching generalized condition reinforcers is important. We do want people or children to respond to praise or a high five positively. We want them to have those experiences because society relies on those. It's a very, very common approach for teachers and employers and parents to praise their kid or give them a high five or use those generalized condition reinforcers like money, classroom bucks. All those things are very common. So we do want to teach those. And this is where the conversation of token economies gets tricky. A lot of people outside the field of ABA do not like them. I go back and forth on it a lot. I get it. They're not the greatest things. So token economy is a generalized condition reinforcer. It works the exact same way as money. Although a lot of people will disagree. A lot of people outside of ABA could have a valid argument of how token economies are not the same thing as earning money. And I'm going to put a cute little graphic here about it if you're curious, and some information in the description box. You can develop your own opinion. I'm not going to share mine because it's not developed yet. I don't know. I go back and forth a lot, guys. I just try to use token economies as visuals more than anything else rather than a earning, rules, contingency, behavior modifying approach. Final term to uncover for task list B today going to be discrimination. So I hit on this one a little bit with discriminative stimulus. Discrimination, and this is a term that everybody gets tripped up on their RBT competency when I run it with them. Discrimination is the word. It's discriminating. We know what discriminate people, different people of color, different groups of people is. Discriminating is the exact same thing when we apply it to materials or situations. Teaching a child discrimination is really important under the right context, of course. Teaching them the difference between a red and a blue card, teaching the difference between, a dog and a cat, that is discrimination. Discrimination can be very fine. It could be, a dolphin versus a seal. It could be the boys' bathroom versus the girls' bathroom. It could be the left shoe versus the right shoe, a fork versus a spoon. It doesn't have to be just two things. You can discriminate classes, features, functions. It's a huge term. Just understand that is telling the difference between things, and that's where ST and S delta come in, is teaching that discrimination is done through reinforcement, punishment, ST, S delta. All right. That is where I'm going to wrap it up. Like I said, I'm going to give verbal offerants and derivative stimulus relations their own podcasts. I'm going to be working on them in the behind the scenes. They'll be coming. I've got more information for you guys. So I kind of alluded to me wanting to talk about my plan moving forward. So I was thinking over the past couple weeks, like, how in the heck am I going to apply applications? I think the most important part of the task list is the applications. How do we take all these definitions and apply them? Because that's the exam, right? Everything is applied on the exam. How do we do that in a podcast? I can put cute little graphics and visuals here, but how do I really make sure you guys understand these concepts and be able to pick them out as story problems, right? And at the same time, I also want to stay organized and just slowly move through the task list. Or do I follow Cooper's guidance? And Cooper kind of jumps around, in the book. It doesn't just go straight to that task list chapter by chapter. It'll hop around, because right now all I've been doing is chapter 1 and chapter 2, and I've just been going through and tying in the task list, because it's just definition, so it's easy to do that. We have task list C left, that is measurement. That's super easy. And then we have, data interpretations. That one's going to be a little bit more tricky. That one's going to be a lot more visual on YouTube and stuff, but I'll do my best to describe it all. How do we apply that into applications? My thought is to start going back and forth between definitions and talking about terminology and going into concepts. On the task list, there is, all the different lists of different, behavior change strategies. There's a task list item for shaping. There's a task list item for chaining. Going through and talking about, okay, when would I use shaping? Under what situations? What skills? What is shaping? How do we apply it? What other things of the task list apply to shaping? So when we're, doing shaping, we have to understand STs and MOs in order to put in shaping. In order for it to be successful, you've got to have good reinforcement contingencies. Talking about all of that and making more of a concept-based podcast rather than just the task list. I'm going to use the task list to guide myself on what terms to go with next, but it's going to be more of discussion-based. We're going to talk about these things more, and more of how to be a BCBA. I think is something that is really hard and it's not taught, which is crazy. You're supposed to get it from your supervision, but some people don't have good supervision. They don't learn how do you use shaping, how do you use chaining, how do you use a behavior contract in your work, when do you make these decisions? And that is the biggest area that I find people struggle the most, is with behavior protocols. Okay, this kid's hitting, what do I do now? That is where our conversations are going to come in, and we're going to tie in those terms, those task lists. It's just not going to be as pretty as going through each single one, but I'm going to do my best. And also I'm going to use Cooper as my guide to kind of follow along those chapters. It's going to be really a combination. My goal is to just use that task list as my guide, use Cooper as my guide, and we're just going to go along this journey together. It's going to be great. I haven't decided whether I'm going to do ethics as 2 really big podcasts just to knock it out, or if I'm going to just sprinkle it in throughout. Not sure. They're going to take a couple podcasts, I know that, but I don't want it to be a month of ethics podcasts right back to back to back. But I'm also not going to avoid it. I'm going to sprinkle in verbal operants in there. So basically, it's just not going to be quite in the order as it has been. Just want to prepare you guys for that. That is going to be very exciting. It's going to be very good material. It's going to be such useful information for you guys to get out there. And the more you can apply this information, understand, when I'm a BCBA, how am I going to do this, the better off you're going to be. Cool, guys. We are finished. I hope you have a fantastic day, and thank you so much for listening this much. Podcast number 9. I'm getting ready to move into podcast number 10. We're going to talk about measurements, and we're going to talk about how to measure behavior, how to measure behavior change. It's going to be amazing. All right, guys. Have a great day.